All right, live on Facebook. Want to tell you guys, thank you for joining. Jerry McNamara, Best Places to Lead. Barry Grayheck is in the crowd. Barry, I was just saying, I haven't seen you in forever, and you still remain one of the funniest people I have ever met. So it's great to see you. And Brad Hollister coming in from Puerto Rico, off probably from scuba diving today. Yannicka, one of our super fans. Summerlin, super fan. Bill Holmes coming in too. It's great to see you guys. We have an awesome guest today. Trey, I am so excited to have a conversation with you because of what you're doing, the book. Trey was just out at Keller Williams, where he was a keynote speaker out there, and Gary just had so many kind words to say about you. So thank you for coming and joining us after wowing the crowd.
Yeah, no, I super appreciate you guys having me. And it was really fun to be out with Gary and share the stage with him. So that was good. And Barry Grayheck and I would probably go down to Pete's Bar and grab a beer, I think. Wouldn't we, Barry? Yeah, I saw where you were from Neptune Beach. Yeah, absolutely. So always good to see people in places that I know. So thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. So listen, we get right into it. So Trey, you have written this book. And I think it's so interesting because every CEO that I know that has been successful doesn't just do three things. They wear about 1 million hats. Yeah. And so tell us about the book that you've written and the only three things that CEOs should be doing.
Yeah. So, when you do a book, you want to get a title that somebody either says hell yes or hell no to. And so this one, I think, splits it down the middle, because people who get it understand that, yeah, I may have a to-do list of 1 million things, but how many of them are important for me to do? And so the Zen magic of the title is supposed to put us in this mindset of saying, what are the things that I can do that no one else in my organization can do? And those things that other people can do that I'm doing is the definition of inefficiency. So I need to let people do the things that they're supposed to do, which means that I do the things that only I can do. And so that's what I mean when I say a CEO only does three things. Do we all have to-do lists? Yeah, we absolutely do. And there's more than three things on them. But this is more of a focus exercise. It's more of a way in the C-suite to make sure that you're touching the most important things, the things that only you can affect at large scale, before you start working on the pebbles. Let's deal with the rocks. And then if you want to and you need to, you can deal with the pebbles, but at least don't neglect the three most important things that only you can do.
All right. So I'm dying to know, because I have been in senior leadership or run 5 different companies. And so what are the three things that we should be focusing on?
Yeah. So the three things are culture, people, and numbers. And what I mean when I say that these are the three things is this: the CEO's sole job, the sole reason we have a guy in that position or a lady in that position, is to set the agenda around what the achievement looks like in those three categories. This is the culture that we want to have in place. These are the people, these are the folks that are going to go on the journey with us, the agenda around that. And these are the numbers by which we will track success against our metrics, and we will know whether we're doing and achieving the right things or not. Does that mean that we can't delegate inside of those areas? Absolutely not. A CEO's primary superpower should be delegation. But setting the agenda on those three things, culture, people, and numbers, is the sole province of the CEO.
Okay. So I think it's good in theory, right? So we talk about like discipline and focus as CEOs. And I think about companies in different stages. So, 0 to 1 have different needs, kind of 1 to 8 million, they have another set of needs. And then, companies get past like your ability to impose your will on the organization, walk down the hall and tell Barry, get off your ass and go do this thing. Right. And so you get past kind of the great man theory, you have a different set of challenges. You have to communicate differently. We have to communicate more effectively because, we don't just yell down the hall. So walk me through, at what point does this kick in, or is this something that the CEO should be doing from literally the day one of the company?
Well, let me flip it back to you, Jerry. Do you know a company of any stage that doesn't need a focus on culture, people, or numbers?
A company of one. I think there's lots of solopreneurs. So culture might be inherent in itself.
And it can be, for sure,
Yep.
it can be. Yep. People can be just one people. You can just be me. And how do I manage that person is a testament to internal discipline, of course. And the numbers that that person produces, even if that is just me, is still something that must be tracked. So my overall argument is that these are three elements of every company that's in existence. So the challenge for me when writing the book was not the solopreneur. My question was, does this apply to the Fortune 50? I've never run a Fortune 50 company. Do these ideas hold water there, or are they something that just isn't the case? Well, in May of this year, I was invited to what is called Secret Mastermind, and it is about 40 Fortune 50 CEOs, CFOs, and COOs, and they just added chiefs of staff this year. And they meet up in some undisclosed locale like Dr. Evil's lair, and you sign an NDA, so you can't say who was there. And they choose one book.
Who was there, Trey?
Who was there? Yeah, I can't tell you. I'll get sued and killed. And they read my book, and then they invited me for half a day, and then ushered me off into. We were in Denver, and I appreciated it. And the sole question that I had for the group was, "Does this hold water for you guys at all?" There were 31 people there. One guy said no, and 30 of them, instead of saying yes, jumped on that guy and said, "What about what you told us last month of you're having this struggle and that kind of thing?" And they converted him to the idea that it was yes. In other words, if every organization must have as an elemental compositional makeup, culture, people, and numbers, somebody has to be in charge of that. Somebody has to be the steward of those functions that go in that place. And so my argument to you, I hope it is convincing, is everybody from a solopreneur to a Fortune 50 COO should be focus on those three things before they focus on the other things that come down the line.
So interesting. So Brad Hollister, who just made a great comment in the comments, I mean, ran a very high growth company, made it to #1 on the Inc. 500. And so he's thinking about the company of the future, where everyone's a company of one. You're outsourcing everything. There was a NYU professor, I can't remember her name. She spoke about this, the whole concept of an economy of one. How do you see the future changing? We have digital, remote, hybrid remote, outsourcing around the world. I look at my assistant, Maria, is from the Philippines. I have always believed in a global workforce. I've been outsourcing for 20 years to the Philippines. And so any thoughts on how this might evolve forward as we continue to become a more global economy?
I think it's a universal principle. And so I see the comments about being product obsessed. Absolutely. My argument is that CEOs that are product obsessed are adding a fourth thing, right? They are deciding that I'm the one that can make the decisions and set the agenda around the product. Steve Jobs, great example, right? Apple isn't Apple without Steve deciding to be the chief product officer. I don't think they ever had that title at Apple, but that doesn't mean that he stopped doing culture. It doesn't mean he stopped doing people or numbers, right? He still set the agenda on all of that. I saw a little clip yesterday on TikTok, which is all of my wisdom nowadays comes from TikTok. It was Bill Burr, and he, the comedian, and he's on one of the talk shows, and he says, "I don't get the obsession with Steve Jobs. What did he do? He didn't invent any of this stuff." Well, to Brad's point, he very much set the agenda around what those inventions needed to look like, how they needed to function, and how that functioned back into the culture of the organization. Anybody walking in the door to Steve's office and saying, the iPhone is stupid or the iPad is ugly or something of that nature would not have been a part of the people equation for him anymore after that. And if those products launched and flopped, even Jobs pulled the plug on things that didn't work. That's the numbers function. And he was a very culture obsessed CEO for sure. So my answer there is that, I think CEOs can add things to the list of three. I just don't think they should be subtracting from them. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have increased hourly work productivity by 10,000% since 1951. if the argument held true that the more productive you got, the leaner you got, we would all have companies with one person in it and everything would be outsourced. We aren't there even today. I do not think we will increase in the next 40 years 10,000%, or sorry, 1,000% in productivity increases. And yet, what do? We still follow the same guidelines. What did you want? Did you really want somebody in the Philippines, or did you want the best possible person for the job who happened to reside in the Philippines? It was the latter, of course. And how did you achieve that? By using the productivity and technology influences that have come to the market in the past 3, 5, 7, 20 years to make it very easy for you to interact with the person best fitted for that position. So I think that that's the case. And again, I go back to the proposition that if you're just one person in an organization, you still have a culture. It's still, how do you treat yourself in regards to the business? You still have people, like we discussed. You still have to make sure those people are getting better at their jobs all the time. And that person still has to be held accountable against numbers that you set in advance.
You just can't fire yourself or the company's out of business.
Or the or is the important part of that, because we see people firing themselves a lot and going and saying, this is not worth it, I'm going to go get a corporate job, so we do see that for sure.
I love it.
Yeah.
Trey, tell me, how did you come to this realization? Like, what was your epiphany to say, man, I've run organizations, I have all of these different competing priorities. How did you get to a place where you just thought, if I just focus in on these 3 things, I'm going to be better for it and the company's going to be better for it?
You give me too much credit, Jerry. I took over the family business and was so scared of what I was doing that I closed the door and Googled, how do you be a CEO? And I couldn't find the answer, right? And I remembered being at a conference. I come from the venture capital world. I had a personal tragedy where my dad passed away without a good succession plan. And I got pulled back into the family business, which is insurance, investments, that sort of thing, employee benefits that we've been doing for 58 years this year. And so I got pulled back into that business, but I didn't know how to do that job. And so in the venture capital business, I once was in a room with a guy called Fred Wilson. Fred Wilson's at Union Square Ventures. And he was asked, tell us about a time that you had to fire the CEO of one of your portfolio companies. And he did, and he gave the story, and he was like, look, VCs don't want to fire the CEOs of companies they invest in. We don't want that job, and we don't know how to source that job. And so he asked an advisor of his, like, what is the job description for a CEO? Well, this guy was 80 years old at the time or something, and he said, CEOs focus on building the right culture that's very transparent and you communicate through. They focus on making sure that they're recruiting the best people and keeping them. And they make sure that there's enough gas in the tank, that there's money to be spent on the things that are important. And I took that and I said, I can steal as good as anybody else can. That's culture, people, and numbers. That's the Trinity. And so from the very first day of me being on the job, I relied on that quote and then began building sort of infrastructure around it. When I began consulting for other companies, I would go in and do a quick analysis just to, dip my toe in the water to see what's the temperature here. And I would find problems in those 3 areas, sometimes in other areas for sure, but I could solve those problems at the top level and it would work its way through a lot of the other problems, or at least go quiet enough that we could focus on a product problem, an offer problem, a sales problem, or whatever was there.
I love it. One of my favorite books is by Austin Kleon, Steal Like an Artist. A fabulous book and just the right mindset. I think everything is regurgitated and you learn the lessons from other people. To my point, and part of this show is we've all had our teeth bashed in. Why can't we just learn from each other? So I don't have to get my teeth bashed in the same way that Zach got his teeth bashed in, and we can all be better together.
I can't stand, Jerry, these guys that they write these books and then they get mad when people use their material. Like nobody wants to be plagiarized. And I've seen that. My friend Jeremy Knopf's on the line with us here, and he sent me a screenshot once of somebody on LinkedIn who said, "Here's what I think," and then it was a straight regurgitation, a quote without the quote marks from my book. Okay, I don't want that. But yeah, the great joy of it is to put it out in the world and have people say, "This is a good idea," and I'm going to run with it. That's a compliment.
I think you're right. Imitation is greatest flattery.
Yeah.
So Marvin Bauer, who was the longtime McKinsey CEO, He said that the CEO's job was so specialized that he didn't feel like executives could prepare for it. You could only prepare for it by actually holding the post. And Nathan Adams, who was on the show, I think episode 4, he looked at me one day when we were talking. He said, there's no training to be CEO. And we kind of chuckled about that. So do you think it's really that way in your estimation? What can leaders do to prepare for the leadership challenge of sitting in the top seat in the organization?
I don't know that I would agree wholesale. Now, they have run much bigger organizations than I have. Okay. So we'll just be transparent on that. What I was looking for with this book started as a legal pad for me to leave the guy that came in behind me, which I figured was going to be another family member to run our family business. And what I wanted them to know was these are the challenges that I face, and these are how I sort of navigated around them. And these are the mental models that I used to think through some of those challenges. What I realized that I was doing was writing a job description for a CEO. And I think if you can write a job description, you can train some of that in there. Having said that, you could train somebody for their entire lives. And I was sort of trained for it. I grew up at my dad's knee, always around him in business conversations. I was one of the first 100 employees at WebMD. I was the only law clerk that WebMD ever, to my knowledge, ever employed when I was in law school. And every single time I was in the building, I was pulled into a very high level conversation with the CEO, the CFO, or in the room watching how they made those sort of decisions. I then was in the venture capital business watching CEOs and how they did the job. And you can't help but do that, to do that thing where you say, what would I do in his situation? Mm-hmm. Usually I would do better. Here's what I would do. But, we all do that sort of thing. But I was in training for the job. But the training is worthless if you never hold the seat, because the gravity of the decisions don't sit on you if you're playing armchair quarterback. And so I think maybe Nathan is right that until you get the job, you don't experience what it would be like to be the CEO. But I think there are things that we can do to train people up into it. A lot of my consulting and coaching right now is with people who the owner and the CEO of the business intend to come up and replace them within 5 years. And so we talk a lot about developing the skill set around actuating culture, people, numbers, but also how do you get things done with people?
Yeah, I think about two things. I think about my earliest mentor, Jerome Keller. And as a really young person, he stuck me in the room in places where I should not have been. And I joke many times that was my crash course MBA on the job training. I was sitting with the head of Adidas and sitting with the head of Nike. I had no reason to be in the room other than Jerry asked me to be there. And I am so grateful that I started to understand these are the conversations that happen. These are the strategic conversations that happen. And, you want to talk about a great jumpstart in life, mentor your people that are in your organization, because when they have the mindset of how we make decisions, how we allocate resources on opportunities, it changes the dynamic that you don't have to come up with all the ideas yourself. We now are empowering people in an engaged way to raise their hand and say, hey, Trey, I see this thing. Did you consider this idea?
Absolutely.
And so I think there is something where if we are intentional, we can start bringing people through that funnel to be more prepared for a very hard seat to sit in.
I think so too. I don't like the idea that I have meetings by myself, with just one-on-one with someone else, because that means that I'm missing a training opportunity with someone. We've just started a new company focused in the real estate space, made our first hire. He's a kid, 24, 25 years old. And I'm involving him on a lot of the Zoom calls, but I don't want or expect him to say anything on the call. I want him absorbing the conversation. This is how these things are discussed and decided on. We should all be doing that to the extent that it is appropriate, of course, and productive. We should all be doing that. What does it mean? I'm paying him to sit around a lot, but every time I ask him something, he has an opinion on it, or he has a question. And the second time we did one of these, he called me and he said, listen, I think you're wasting your time with this. I don't know anything you guys are talking about. And I said, well, how are you ever going to learn that? So I think that's right. Important. Another quote comes to mind. I'm a fan of history. You know that if you've read the book. Caesar Augustus, so the adopted son of Caesar, Octavian was his name. He ruled as emperor in everything but name for almost 60 years in Rome. And his last speech before the Senate, I'll mess the quote up, but he said something akin to young men listen to an old man who old men listened to when I was a young man, right? And his point was, from the age of 14, he was in the councils of great men. His uncle, Caesar, his other power players in the empire and that sort of thing. He was there in those conversations, and he was smart enough at that point and educated enough and proactive enough to create value at that age. And so that carried on throughout his career, which I think is a very, very important thing for us to remember. We, as a culture, as a business culture, are not training our successors well at all right now.
I think you're right. And I'll add two things. One is Jerry Keller also told me, shut up, listen, and learn. So I was in good company to have that thought. And, when you say that, it brings to mind, recent research. There was 15,000 leaders surveyed by DDI, and they talked to CEOs, and they said, what is your level of confidence? What percentage of your senior leaders do you trust to deliver on the objectives for the company? And I thought it was really interesting. The percentage was 48%.
Yeah.
So CEOs only trust 48% of their senior leaders to deliver results. And I thought, man, that is craziness. The second follow-up is, when you look at the next level of the organization, so if that's your C-suite, what is your VP level or director level, depending on how your organization is set up? Only 11% on the people behind to step into those roles. So 11% confidence and preparedness for those people to step into new roles. And so to me, there's a very clearly a leadership crisis that we have. We're not delivering results. 80% of companies recognize it's a problem, and yet only 5% of organizations have developed a leadership program coherently throughout the organization to prepare people. And so I always find stuff like that really interesting. Like, we recognize it's a problem, we don't trust in the senior leadership, and yet we're doing nothing about it. And so to me,
and it's getting worse over time. With each successive sort of half generation of leadership, I think the problem gets worse. We are not investing in the proper way. I won't call out a certain company, but one of the big life insurance companies, I had several meetings with the CEO there. And I said, you have all of these sort of boomer and old Gen X folks sucking up 90% of the commissions that are being paid here. They pay nothing to the kids to learn the business as they're coming in. At some point, you're going to pay for that sin. And the pay for the sin is, as the older guys disappear, the newer guys are not there to generate the new business. And there's the problem. And they are in the early stages of seeing that. Now, she knew that. I wasn't telling her something she didn't know, but she knew that, and she wanted to plan around it, and had the biggest problem doing that. That's one of the contributors, is that we aren't investing down. The other contributor is it is not too easy. It is very easy for somebody of a certain giftedness level to go out and start their own thing, which is a good thing, I think, for sure. I believe in that. But what it means is that we are beggaring good organizations of good talent as well, because we aren't investing that way. Look at GE. GE is the quintessential training corporation of our lifetime, which has largely ceased to exist now. Not only did they train really well for people to move up in their own organization, as people moved up and out, they were the heads of people that did business with GE. So, I mean, you can just go down the list of when they replaced Jack Welch with Jeff Immelt, mistake. All four of his lieutenants went and took over Fortune 100 companies almost immediately. Home Depot comes to mind with Bob Nardelli, and a lot of other companies like that. Well, they did that not because they were some superhuman, fell from Krypton. They did that because they had been trained in such a way to be able to run large organizations, to be able to focus on what those cultures needed to look like. How do you recruit and retain those people, and what things should you be achieving numbers wise? And so, they have now dismantled all of that training inside the rump of what's left of GE, and nobody else is doing. IBM has a sort of thing like that, but nobody else is training nearly the same way.
I think it's interesting. And Brad Hollister asked another good follow-up question. I don't know what the trust rate was 30 years ago, but because of tenures, my guess is that tribal knowledge was spread and stayed much longer. And so I would expect it to have been much higher. And, to his point, does it even make sense to invest when the average tenure of an employee is now 30 months?
It's a challenge, isn't it? It's a challenge for all of us. I guess the question, and I think this is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke that you hear from management consultants all the time, if you don't invest in your people, you're going to have people that weren't invested in. So the ones that stay are going to be the ones that weren't invested in. The conundrum is, if I invest in people really hardcore, do they get up and leave and go do their own thing? Of course, right? My answer to that, at least in my own small universe, has been culture. So do we have people leave our culture? We absolutely do. But do we have people that stay because of the culture? We absolutely do. And a lot of that cultural conversation will come in and they'll say, hey, I am now doing this job instead of this job. I can go do this somewhere else, but I want to stay in this environment. What can we do on compensation or authority or whatever it is that they want to see? Your culture has to be flexible enough to allow for that, of course. So I don't know that there's a silver bullet there in any way, but it is the conundrum that we're facing when we have 3%, or 2.3% unemployment or whatever the crazy number is today.
It is crazy. So walk me through, right? We have three key things that we should be focusing on as CEO. Which one's the most important?
No, trick question. One doesn't exist without the others. So maybe a different way of looking at it is, if you don't get the culture right, the people and numbers will never get right. So a lot of people will now focus on culture. Well, culture is a very amorphous concept. And so, what do you mean work on culture? How do I do that? Well, that's part of the point of the book for me, is to say, these are the things that you can do, the practical things that are not sort of, ethereal and navel gazing and make you feel good about yourself, but really have no impact on the business. No, we're not interested in that. We're interested in building and articulating and being transparent about a culture. And your culture shows up in the behaviors of your people. And the prime behavior that you want from your people is the production against and achieved and articulated goal numbers. And so they have to thread together. Absolutely. And so the first step that we typically take when we come into an organization is to go through and do an inventory of culture. What are the values that are literally being lived today? Not the ones that you think, not the ones that you wrote 10 years ago and put on the wall, right? But what is actually being done in terms of values and behaviors today? That's typically where we start. So is it more important than the other two? I don't feel that way at all. But it's usually the place that we get the most productive work done.
I think it's interesting. I was on the phone with a CFO recently inside one of my companies, and he was talking about, he had come from very large corporations, and he felt like values were not really that important. They're just things that were on the wall and that weren't lived by. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective. And so for him, there was a wholesale discount of its importance. And, my researcher, Paul, did a great job of research this week. And I found this to be really interesting, Trey. Like, only 28% of these survey respondents believe that they understand their culture well. And only 19% believe that they have the right culture. So only a fraction of people even know what the culture is, and a smaller fraction believe that they're in a good space with culture. When you think about that, how do you adjust a culture that maybe has been neglected, that hasn't been focused in on, like, you have to reinvent it, the words were just on the wall and we haven't, been accountable to them and calling out, behaviors that are adverse to the values, first time, every time.
Sure.
So how do you, any suggestions for a CEO who maybe is looking and saying, my culture isn't exactly where I want it to be. How do you get them to level that up?
Yeah, we never go into an organization that says we don't have values here, right? They're always on the wall. Is that where we want values to show up? No. Do you know who sees the values on the wall? The customer who is not being treated with those values sees that. That's of no use whatsoever. I keep telling myself I'm going to memorize this, and I haven't done it yet. Enron had their mission statement engraved in 11-inch gold leaf letters in Houston and New York, right? And it was integrity and intelligence and all of that sort of thing. We know that they are synonymous with thieving and cheating and lying and stealing and all of that sort of thing. What you put on the wall doesn't matter. What shows up in the behavior of your people is actually your culture. And take it off the wall and sit back. This is in the book. You sit back and you observe. You make a concerted observation as to how do we actually respond. You look at the rituals, what gets celebrated in the organization. I was at a planning retreat for one of my clients who's been a client now for 5 years, but that first year, she had 20% of the staff quit the week of training, of planning. And the rest of the staff celebrated their leaving.
Yeah.
Now, there's two sides to that. One, these potentially were toxic people. You know, the insider said those are toxic people. If I had talked to the people leaving, they would have said those are the toxic people. But toxicity existed in the culture and was tolerated. And the CEO had to sit back and say, the things that we liked about the behaviors of the people that left are things that we want to continue doing. The things we hate about them, we don't want to do anymore. And as soon as we had that conversation, when the mirror turned back around, people said, well, if I'm going to be honest, I did a lot of what she did that I really don't like. But I did it because, and then we had a business issue to solve, right? I'm doing 3 people's job. Well, that will make anybody act countercultural in some ways. So it's very much a CEO-led conversation, observation, reflection that has to take place. And it's okay with me if you want to use the values that you think you have, but you have to be really open and very much committed to the truth to know that you are not acting inside of the parameters of those values. And your values must be aspirational as well. So it can't be so, oh, we do that 100% of the time, we don't need to think about it. Well, if that's the case, then your culture is not big enough. You need to have more of that. We had a terrible thing happen in one of my companies over the past 2 years, that our prime supplier of goods was manufacturing something that we were throughputting to clients that was not good. And we scrambled and we really fell on our face culturally in that organization. And so at planning this year, as the chairman of that company, I got that company back together and I said, guys, we have to be honest that we didn't act culturally in this past year. We were reactive and we were just trying to do it. Now, let's feel sorry for ourselves for 5 minutes. Let's make sure that we blame everybody else for 5 minutes, right? Whose fault was it? Oh, everybody had an opinion on that, okay? And now it's over. Now, how do we restore through behaviors the cultural principles that we want to be true in the world? And that's what the CEO has to do. The CEO in that company did not do that. And he's the CEO of another company now because he couldn't reposition the culture to produce the results that we wanted to see.
I think it's so important. I think the easiest way that I've heard culture explained is it's what you celebrate and it's what you don't tolerate. So the words can be on the wall, doesn't matter. It's what we actually are doing day in and day out. It's how people feel when they go home at night. Are they excited and holy smokes, I get to work with Trey. This is amazing. He's smart and all of these things. And yet, you're right. Companies miss the mark on this one so much.
They do. I nerd out on etymologies, Jerry. You know, like where does the word come from? So if you look at where the word culture comes from a Latin root that shares the same Latin root with the English word for cultivate. And so the culture is what you cultivate. And when you cultivate something, you clear the ground of things that will make it not healthy. You plant the seed, you water it, you nourish it, you do those kinds of things, and then you defend it from everything that will make it not produce. And I mean, what a great analogy and way to think about what our culture is. Gary Keller loves the example of your culture is your fish tank. and it's the water in the fish tank. What are you doing to keep it clean and to keep it where it will support the right species to be in the water? So that's another one to think that.
That is so good. Trey, you're crushing it. I hope everyone's enjoying the value bombs. I always look and say, I always love to hire from the scratch in denial, because business is really hard. And I need people that are gritty and resilient and committed to something bigger than themselves. They've somehow overcome in their life. How is it that you're going about ensuring you have the right people inside your organization? Because I know every single last one of us have hired someone and thought this person is going to be amazing. And then suddenly they were not.
Yeah.
Any tips on what you've learned in managing the people component? Because inviting people on the mission that you're on, right, is the start of accelerating your business forward.
Yeah, a few thoughts there. Number one, can we just pause for a second and just all agree that we've all done that?
Yes.
Right? So that is a universal. That isn't some personal failing of yours that no one else shares. And one of my biggest pet peeves, the older I get, when you're a kid, you think the adults have all of this figured out. And never once does someone come to you and say, the hardest thing you're ever going to do is not fire a bad person, but is to hire a mediocre one. That's the hardest thing for CEOs, right? Just to get somebody who's good enough to fill the chair. And especially today when you have to hire people and you have to pay them to show up for interviews and things like that. I just want everybody to know that this is a problem that every single person faces. I think that's important. Secondly, my definition of people are the folks that are on the journey with you. Okay, so the minute that they are not on the journey with you, they can't be on the journey with you, right? It's easy to change people. It's hard to change people. You know what I mean? Like, you have to get the right people and keep them together. Going to a place. Well, if you can't articulate that place, is it their fault that they're not keeping up with the crowd? If they're not all together with you? Not at all. It's your fault. Fault and blame is not that important, but let's assume that we have a moral compass here to assign responsibility. So people are the folks on the journey with you, okay? And they have to be going somewhere. Third, you have to understand people. And I think that is an impossibility that's slightly possible. And the way that we understand people is to understand ourselves. It's my belief that we're created in three different overlapping dimensions: an intellectual, an emotional, and an identificational dimension. Okay, you can shorthand it: I think, I feel, and I am. Well, the problem in the world for a long time has been we think it's all intellectual. Jerry, if I just make the right argument to you with stacks and stacks of numbers and lots of people who agree with me, then you will say, oh, he's right, and now I will change all of my behaviors to become exactly like what he's telling me I should be. Never once has happened that way. Emotions are made, or decisions are made emotionally. And so for the last 30 or 40 years, we've tried to pay attention as a culture a lot around people's emotions and their self-esteem and their EQ and all of those kinds of things. And I don't know that our decisions have gotten any better in the last 30 years than they were in the previous 300 years as far as those kinds of things go, because what really controls the behavior of people is what they believe to be true about themselves at an identity level. And when we parent, when we manage, and those are and should be separate things. I don't mean to suggest that your employees are children and have to be parented. I hope they are not. But we need to interact with people in the same lens as far as that goes. Well, that's exactly the same thing that's true for me. So when I want to make big changes in my life, I don't read 100 books and pat myself on the back to feel better about what I'm doing. I change something in my identity, and that's what lasts for a long time. Okay. This is how you recruit the right people, by finding out, are they someone who says, I am this kind of person? To themselves, are they saying that? And you can see that exhibited in behaviors. That's also how you retain people. We had a very difficult discussion with the head of one of my sales teams in the past 12 months. And we were perfectly willing to let this person go. And she came back to me and she said, I can't go anywhere else because I am the name of this company. This is who I am. And I said, well, if that is the case, then your behaviors now have to show that. And I am always willing to give that second, third, fourth chance if that's the case. We told her that. She had one little tweak to the org chart that she needed to have made. We did that for her as well. Completely different person today because she's living that value. Those values that she said she identified with, stellar. If she had gone to a competitor, it would have hurt us, but because we were able to make that adjustment with the understanding that she needed an identity adjustment, it was perfect. And it's been a good fit for her and for us for at least 9 or 10 of those months now that we're past that decision. So understand yourself, understand people is the third thing. And then lastly, I think this is so trite that people would roll their eyes about it, but you got to treat people like they're people, like they have intrinsic value. If you treat people like they are only valuable because of what they closed last week, the number of files they shuffled around, the quality of the graphic image that they produced, any of that stuff, you are making a temporary contract with that person. I will show you respect and dignity as long as you do these things. Okay? That's not going to work. That is by definition temporary. That temporary could be 20 years, no problem. I have people that are with me 20 years, no problem. Maybe that's the temporary organization or agreement that we've made. In reality, what I need to do is treat them with dignity. And so I go a lot out of the way and really kind of force the hand of CEOs that work with me sometimes to do this as well, which is I want to see you writing notes to family members, to the people themselves, to PR, the wins of other people in the organization, not just your own, to put the spotlight where good behaviors are, because people will then recognize good behaviors and model them for other people as well. So that's how you retain good people in my world. I write 500 thank you cards a year. That's a goal that I set every single year. I read 100 books. I write 500 thank you cards every year. About 50 of them go to the individual recipient who did the action. And the majority of the rest of them go to people that support that person, either at business, but mostly at home. So we had a person win the sales award for one of my organizations in December. And I wrote each one of his 4 kids a note that says, I know that dad is away from home a lot. I want you to know the impact he has on people by being away, because it's worth it in what he's doing. You think that guy leaves me for 50 cents an hour raise or something? Never. He's never going to do. I won't say he's never going to leave, because maybe he will for the right opportunity, but he's going to know that he's loved and I have dignity in my view of him as long as he's in my orbit.
It's so interesting. Like, this people thing gets me really fired up because I love leadership and leading. And I've never met someone who shows up to work and says, you know what, I really want to suck today. And yet there are plenty of ineffective people, and it's because there's poor leadership. And you've said it differently, but it's in the same theme. I call it the 4 C's. Do you have clarity on how you win every day? Are you challenged by the work that you're doing? Are you cared about by your leader? And are you comfortable that you have the tools and resources to succeed? Because being asked to do something that you don't have the tools and resources, you're in a slippery slope. If you get those 4 things right, same thing with you, being the awareness, people don't leave you. It's really simple stuff, unless their trajectory in life, they want to go start their own business or their interests have changed. That's great. We celebrate those things. But that's my guiding 4 C's: clarity, comfort, care, and challenge. And
I like it.
Yeah,
I think you're right. I think those are the elements of job satisfaction, which is exactly what you're saying. That's how people decide that they want to show up and do good work. And let's be honest, secretly, our teams are showing up and they're looking at us and saying, I want to give my all, but I don't want to be made a fool for doing that. Right? So you got to make it safe for me to do my best work. Like, I don't want backstabbing from other people. I don't want people taking credit for my work. I don't want to make you $100 million and you pay me 40,000. Like, I want to be here, and I don't want to be vulnerable in that way to you, right? And so I think you get job satisfaction when that comes in.
Yeah, I think you're right. Megan Bowen, who I think was episode 22, she talked about psychological safety inside of companies, and she just did
So important.
a brilliant job. And so if anyone's interested in hearing about that, I would tell you, she broke down that piece of it. It's like, wow, we can just end the conversation because it was so good.
Yeah.
So I'm a data hound, right? I love numbers because I think numbers not only allow you to accelerate the business, they allow you to make the right decisions faster. And so walk us through, like, how do you determine what's the roadmap? Are there specific numbers that all companies should be reviewing? Is it situational? Is it just the mindset of like, you have to pay attention to the numbers? Marcus Lemonis, know the numbers, know the numbers, know the numbers, right? And so, one guy that was great at that when I would sit in meetings with him is Barry Grayheck. I mean, recite things off the top of his head. And I was like, he's got to be cheating because like it's insane.
But nobody knows your numbers as well as you do, Barry, right? So they can't call you on them when you're wrong about them. That's exactly it, right? That's the parlor trick right there. Look, Keller read the book and he said, Trey, the numbers section is the shortest section of the book. Why is that? And I said, Gary, people know their numbers, right? They know the unit economics of what I got to do to pay my bills at the end of the month or week or whatever the story is. I don't focus too much on that, except to say the CEO's job is to set the agenda around numbers. So the CEO is the one that gets to determine what gets tracked. The CFO or anybody else that has that delegated responsibility is the one that potentially figures out how it gets tracked and should be looking in the data stream there to make informed judgments. So potentially, hey, we see this amount of orders, but we know our producers can only produce this. We're going to have a delay down the line. That's important to know. But the CEO should have set an expectation around customer delivery satisfaction or something of that nature up front. So the KPIs, look, you have to worry top line, you have to worry bottom line, and you have to worry profit. You absolutely have to do that. And then you have, to Keller's point, the one thing. You always have the one thing that you have to be doing that's super niche to your business. Keller's is, how many agents can I recruit? And that's what he said, Trey, we set that as a goal many years ago, and I thought the next year we'd have a different goal. And it's 20-something years in, and it's the same goal. How many guys can we get on the bus with us? Because he believes, and you can't argue with results, that his model is superior and puts a better experience out into the world for those agents that participate in that. And so that's what they preach. Barry's business may be very different. Jeremy's is very different. They know their one thing. That is not where I see challenges that CEOs have. Very rarely do I come in the business and they say, oh, I don't know what we're supposed to do, and I don't know what we did last month. Very rarely. I do see where they are not paying attention to numbers with the same dedication that they should be, right? So all of the businesses that I have, I review numbers Saturday morning. I have 2 cups of coffee and I go through commission statements. I go through whatever the number is, depending on the business that I'm in. I own a marketing firm, and we're going to look at the number of inbound leads for marketing. I own real estate businesses. We're going to look at real estate trends and who's late and all of those kinds of things, because each of those has a different thing. That's not where the challenge lies. Have your KPIs. The challenge lies in being transparent with them. We set our employees up for failure almost as if it was intentional by never telling them, this is the number, and this is why it's important, and this is why it matters to you. We don't contextualize it and break it down all the way down to the level of the guy who's actually doing the work. So we're constantly driving the car at very high speeds by looking in the rearview mirror. That's not smart. We can't be doing that. Third, on numbers, we have to be giving it away, right? I'm a firm believer that you can make as much money as you want to make. Absolutely, you can do that. But the point that you cross where you're not sharing that relative to the value that your team members create in the organization, those team members are going to leave. Let me say what I didn't say. I'm not saying that you have to give people raises for being around. I don't believe in that. We do not have a formal annual review structure in any one of my businesses. Anybody can get a raise anytime, or a spot bonus or compensation in any form, when they have created value for the organization. 2 weeks ago, we had a very toxic employee in one of the organizations. We didn't throw her out, but we held the door open while she threw herself out. We were very pleased to have her no longer be part of our lives. We didn't replace her yet. We're still in the hiring process, which takes a lot of time now. One of the other persons in the organization stood up and began doing her job. She got her paycheck Friday. Guess what the paycheck was? It was double what she had earned before. Why? Because she's doing 2 jobs. She should be paid that paycheck. I didn't laugh and put it in my pocket and buy her a beer and say, hey, good work this week. I hope great things come to you in the future. Absolutely not. I gave her both paychecks, as she should have received. And that's exactly how you have to treat people, right? Now, what she doesn't know is that there's an additional bonus coming to her for giving me the breathing room of hiring the right replacement. So she'll do that job, those 2 jobs, she'll do them for a couple of 3 weeks. She can't do both of them at 100%. We know that. If she could, I would simply hire somebody that could do both of them and make an informed decision on that. She can't, but she's willing to stand in the breach while we get it right. Then there's an extra bonus coming for her when the process has been finished. Yeah.
Love it. Most people would put that money in their pocket and buy the beer. And I think that's an amazing
beer's
concept.
Cheap for a reason.
You're right. Hey, Jeremy wanted me to ask you about Grant Cardone and numbers. If anyone doesn't know who Grant Cardone is this larger than life personality, big sales guy. And so he is very well known. So go ahead, Trey. Just context.
Yeah, and he holds this message, which is really good, which is, why are you thinking about 1xing your business? You should be thinking about 10xing it. And if you fail at that, you probably have done yourself a lot better than just trying to get it 1x better. He's really got a good message as far as that goes. Grant's one of those polarizing figures that some people love him, some people hate him. I don't care where you come out on it. The man is a smart guy. He's built something for himself, and he has lots of adherents around the world, and he's created lots of good. So that's as much as an endorsement that I would give him, and he would probably give me. The thing about this one individual conversation that we were having was at Pitch Fest, and somebody was telling us about their business model, and we liked the business, which was a small business. But what I loved about it was the amazing data they were collecting that I didn't know was available anywhere else. And so he was ready to pass on the business. And I said, Grant, wait 1 second. And the rest of the panelists, Kevin Harrington was there with us and some other folks. And I said, wait 1 minute. You guys are missing the real business here. The real business is in the numbers. The real business is in the data that she's collecting. And she hasn't turned that into a data stream, a revenue stream yet, because she doesn't understand it either. And then I sort of opined for a few minutes about that. And Grant was gobsmacked, which he has never gobsmacked. And he sat back and he said, just Trey Taylor guy is the smartest guy in the room. Well, that was much to his regret, because I have taken that phrase and marketed it around all the time. And, I think he totally hates that he said it at that point. But anyway, that's sort of a little laugh that I get with Cardone from time to time.
Well, Trey, I think today you're the smartest guy in the room. So
thank you.
I'm going to be with Grant on that one.
Appreciate it. I'll say that you said that too, Jerry.
Amen. Do it. I'll put it in writing.
Okay.
So we're going to wrap up here, but Trey, just for everyone, how do they get in contact with you? How do we buy your book? Give us that feedback, and then I have one more question for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all of the online places that you would buy books. It has a website, so if you want a signed copy of it, you can go ceoonlydoes3things.com, fill out the little form, and I've got a stack of them that I'm constantly sort of signing on the desk and sending them out. Happy to do that as well. If you like the kinds of things that I talk about, I publish, I don't know what to call this, Jerry. It's a newsletter for sure. It's a Substack newsletter. And I write it when I feel like it. I write it when I have something to say. So it doesn't come out every single Thursday or something, like Ferris does and all of these guys, and James Clear that has a really good, I'm just not disciplined in that way. And I feel like I'd be reaching for stuff to put in it. It is things that I find interesting. It is soapboxes that I have to get on because I don't see it being said somewhere else. I talk about wine, which is a big passion of mine. I talk about venture capital, investments, management strategy, insurance, real estate, any of those kinds of topics. And I blurb them out. So the longest newsletter is, 4 paragraphs long or 5 paragraphs long or something of that nature. It's got a couple of motivational quotes in it as well. So it's free. Sign up for it, and you'll get as much of me as you can stand, and then you can mute it when you've had enough. And then last, you can find me at my consulting website, trinity-blue.com.
Got it. Love it. Love it. Love it. I mean, this has been tremendous, Trey. I'm so grateful for you. I mean, the amount of truth bombs you have dropped, I do not envy Maria and Roanne, who helped create the micro clips, because the amount of micro clips that they could probably pull from here is too robust than we can even publish.
Oh, that's
So
very kind of you to say. I love that. You know, in my presentations, that's one of the things that I always call out is I'm about to deliver some truth bombs. And I used to have this slide, and it was called, it had like a little icon of coffee. I'm here to, deliver a wake up. I didn't think that was violent enough, so we put truth bombs in there now. So maybe I'll have some good stuff here.
I love it. So here's the last question that I have. What's the difference between a good CEO and a great CEO?
Well, obvious. Brad Whitchurch, a mutual friend of ours, would tell you that that a good CEO reads my book, right? That's all that's necessary for that. Now, a good CEO is somebody who's going through the process that they have and they're doing their best at it, no doubt about it. A great CEO goes one level deeper than that. And a great CEO is someone who, in relation to people, precepts gifts in them that they don't see in themselves yet, perceives before they see them, perception, and then calls those gifts out in a mechanism called evocation, from the Latin ex voca, to call from within. Okay, give you an example, two examples really quick. Number one, I had a sixth grade algebra teacher, Mrs. Brownlee. She was 6 feet tall because she had these big old shoes. She wore these polyester pantsuits. She had a bouffant hairdo. She had these little butterflies, on her vest all the time. That's right. She's a larger than life kind of figure. And she made me the homework monitor for the algebra class, which is a very glamorous position, that every sixth grade kid who's trying to make friends aspires to. And she was really a wonderful person, but she gave me this terrible job. And after a lot of stress around that job, I came back to her and said, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't know why you picked me for it. I don't like it. My friends don't like me because I narc them out when they don't do their homework. And she says, do you really not know why I gave you this job? And I had no idea. And she pulled out the last report that I had submitted to her, and she showed me, and my name had an X next to it. And she said, why did you mark yourself as not having done the homework? And I said, because I didn't do it. And she said, right and wrong matter, Mr. Taylor. I see that in you, and you need to know that it's true for yourself. And then she did that, pull down the glasses thing that teachers love to do, and sent me out into the hallway. I can remember that sensation on my skin today like I could in 1986, like somebody had poured water on me or struck me with lightning. It's the first time I ever knew something about myself. Every time she would pass me in the hall after that, she would tell me to do something, and I would do it because I knew she had my best interest at heart. No doubt about it. So she would say, hey, that's a sign-up sheet for the student council. Why isn't your name on that? So, because I don't want you to put your name on that. And I did, and I won the race, and you know how hotly contested those things are. I'm in politics to this day because Miss Brownlee told me that I should be. I was walking down the hall one day, probably skipping class or whatever, and she said, I want you to meet a new student. This is Todd Cannon. He's transferred from another school. That means he's coming into an environment where he doesn't have any friends. You're to be his friend, and you're to introduce him to everybody that's good for him. I remember it like she just said it in my ear. Todd Cannon and I are still friends and met for drinks last week because he's going through something and I was going through something, and we're still friends because Miss Brownlee saw that kind of gift and was able, as a wonderful leader, to call that out in people. There's no superpower here. It's simply a decision to look for the gifts that people have in themselves and don't know that they have, and to call it out through a mechanism of praise, ideally. She wasn't very good at that, but a mechanism of praise, or at least saying, I think you are very good at this. Do I have one more second to tell another follow-up on that?
Of course, it was great.
Okay, good. Jack Welch was CEO for like 44 years or something like that, a really long time at GE. Jack was hired the same day as the chairman of my board, and they knew each other and they were contemporaries until my chairman left and went to another job. When he left, there was a party, they went to a bar or whatever they did at GE, and he said, he took George by the neck and he said, George, you're going to end your career at one of the heights of the industry because you care about results and you care about people. George left. He was in my office the day that Jack Welch happened to pass away. I got a little Wall Street Journal alert on my phone. So, Jack Welch dies at 94 or whatever. I mentioned it, didn't even look at George. I said, oh, Jack Welch died. And, was still running my mouth and looked over and he had tears coming down his eyes. Why would he do that? He hadn't talked to Jack Welch in 28 years. He hadn't received a Christmas card from him. They were not friends. Why did he do that? Because the great ones impact us at the level of our identity. I don't want to be a good CEO. I want to be a great one. I want to be somebody that touches and expands people at the level of how they see themselves. I will always benefit from that if I'm around them and if I'm tasking them properly. But even if I don't benefit from it, I have a moral obligation to do it if I know I can do it. That's what makes a great leader, is somebody who can put that into practice on a minute-by-minute basis. And you've had a lot of those guys on your show guesting, and I am so pleased to have been in their company and appreciate the time you've given me, Jerry.
Trey, what an amazing finish. It aligns so much of what I believe, which is, my first value: love your people and treat them as whole people. And it's why that I'm on this mission right here, right? Positively impact 5 million people in the next 5 years through better business. And so that's the mission that I've been called to, and it's one I've accepted. And I love being able to share it with people like you who, share values and the positive impact that we can make on the world and take that really, really seriously. And so thank you so much. So, all right. Amazing stuff. I knew this one was going to be awesome. Trey, you were awesome. Next week, we have Park Howell, who wrote The Narrative Gym, which outlines the ABT framework, which is the and, but, therefore, because stories are the way in which we can get change to happen easier. And what I found is leaders aren't great storytellers. And so Park is going to come on and walk us through the ABT framework. I hope you guys will join, because he is so good. It's so simple and so easy. And you think, how could it possibly be effective? But it is so effective. And so I would invite you to come join us next week with Park. He's a fun guest too. He's a funny guy. Other just housekeeping notes. If you miss an episode, please subscribe on your favorite platform, iTunes, Spotify, whatever it is. And if you like being here, which you do, and thanks for coming, I would invite you, please give a 5-star rating, because apparently that's important. And Alex Sanfilippo told me that's super important. So if you guys could do that, that would be great. And again, thank you so much. And we will see you guys next week with Park Health.